Chrissy Teigen. I don't really know what Chrissy Teigen does, but she is all over social media and she's frequently in the headlines. Chrissy Teigen is pregnant again through IVF after she had a miscarriage. And I do remember when the story of her miscarriage came out. So Chrissy Teigen suffered a late miscarriage. It's very, very sad. And she mourned the loss of her child as a child. And this was very, very sad. And now, what was it? Some months later, at least, or some years later, I guess this was actually a couple of years ago, she has become pregnant again, and now she's very excited. She said, the last few years have been a blur of emotions, to say the least, but joy has filled our home and hearts again. 1 billion shots later, in the leg lately, as you see, because she's going through IVF, we have another one on the way. I have a great deal of sympathy for Chrissy Teigen. I can't even really imagine how terrible it is to have a miscarriage that late. Especially that late, to have any miscarriage really, but especially that late when you've invested so much emotionally and physically into this baby, and then the baby dies in the womb. It's very, very sad. And I'm happy for her that she will get to have a baby. Hopefully she'll get to have a baby. The question then you got to ask yourself, especially if you're a supporter of abortion. First question, why was Chrissy Teigen so sad when she had a miscarriage? The pro-abortion people tell us that's a clump of cells, that's morally irrelevant, it's no big deal, it's a parasite, get rid of it. Get rid of it and then go have a party for how fun your abortion was. Well, if that's true, then Chrissy Teigen shouldn't be sad. Then we should think Chrissy Teigen's really weird for being sad over her miscarriage. Why are you so sad? It was just a clump of cells. It was just a random, morally irrelevant. We have to grapple with that. Only one of those two things can be true. It can either be the case that this is a meaningless clump of cells, or it's really sad that Chrissy Teigen had the miscarriage. Obviously, the latter is true, and Chrissy Teigen is sad because that's a life in the womb. Okay, so we should discard the pro-abortion talking points. And it's not like Chrissy Teigen is some right-wing, rock-ribbed conservative. She's a cultural figure, and I assume she's on the left. So the left should take a minute and think about that, okay? The value of Chrissy Teigen's child does not just come because she likes the child or she wants to acknowledge the child. The value has to come from the child intrinsically. But then there's another harder question, which is, if all that is true, if Chrissy Teigen is right to be sad over her miscarriage, it is because babies are babies from the moment they are made. Not just from the moment of birth, not just at 8 months and 29 days, but babies are babies from the very beginning. And if babies are babies from the very beginning, IVF is not morally acceptable. And this is a hard message, and I know there are a lot of conservatives who support IVF. And I know there are a lot of even maybe not a lot, but there are a number of pro-lifers who support IVF. And I know part of the reason for that is people have benefited personally from IVF. And people say, well, my child was conceived through IVF. Are you telling me my child shouldn't exist? No. I'm certainly not saying that. It's wonderful that your child exists. The child has value. The value of a child is not determined by the way that the child was conceived. This is why we don't think we should just kill people who are conceived through rape. And I've got a podcast out right now called the Choosing Life podcast, where we talk to people who survive abortions, and you hear this throughout the pro-life movement. People who are conceived through rape say, they'll confront pro-abortion activists. They'll say, do you think that I should be killed? Just because? No, of course not. The way a child is conceived does not determine the value of that child. But likewise, it doesn't justify rape, and it doesn't justify methods that are immoral. Good ends do not justify immoral means. And in the case of IVF, it's really hard to argue that it's morally acceptable, because IVF, there are lots of moral issues with IVF, but one of them is you create lots of human beings, lots of little embryos, most of which you just put in a freezer forever, some of which you then implant in the woman. And then sometimes, if too many of them take, the IVF process will entail abortion to reduce the number of embryos in the womb. There are all sorts of problems, but even at the most, and there are problems actually in addition to that through the method at which these embryos are conceived. But even the ones that are just in the freezer, you're telling me life is sacred from the very beginning, and we're all pro-life, and a person's a person no matter how small. What about the babies in the freezer? It's not it's not acceptable. I've racked my brain trying to figure out a way in which IVF can be morally justified. I can't think of it. And then there's an even broader political issue, which is that it is not a good idea, I think, to put technology, to establish the domination of technology or any kind of power, a corporate power or a state power, to establish that domination over the origin and destiny of human life. That seems like it could go wrong really fast. It seems like it necessarily goes wrong really fast. And I think most people on most political issues are kind of like Chrissy Teigen. They hold views and they engage in behaviors that are contradictory. Chrissy Teigen so publicly mourns her child who died in the womb, because a person's a person no matter how small, and then engages in IVF. And she probably has no idea that there is a conflict there, that there's a contradiction there. But it's important for us to talk about it, especially now that we're in a post-Dobbs world. We've gotten rid of Roe v. Wade. We've gotten rid of Planned Parenthood v. Casey. We can acknowledge that babies are actually babies. We've moved past kindergarten, the kindergarten level of talking about pro-life, and now we need to get to the second grade level. And now we need to get to the fourth grade level. And now, because it goes a lot deeper than just don't murder babies in the womb. If you want to get rid of our culture of death, if you want to create a culture of life, it's got to go a lot deeper than that. We've got to talk about what life means, why life has value, where babies come from, what the relation of the sexes are, what sexuality means to the human person. The conversation goes much, much deeper. And it is no coincidence that the moment in our history that gave us abortion, the 1960s, is also the moment in our history that gave us the entire sexual revolution, promiscuous sex, all sorts of weird gender ideologies. It's no coincidence that those are all happening around the same time, because they're all deeply related. And we're not really going to solve any of those problems individually until we have a coherent view of what human life is and why it ought to be protected. I'm so glad you liked that clip. You know, we hit 1 million subscribers, and that's big, I know, but we don't want to rest on our laurels. We don't want to pat ourselves on the back. I want to hit 1 billion. I do. So I really need you to ring, subscribe, like, click, MySpace, I don't know. Make sure you get the notifications. We'll see you next time.